everyone, I'm just going to give a little bit more detail on the collectives part from the Politics of Writing part 2. You know, we covered more their relationship to one another, not as much on their own inner workings. So I think this hopefully will be helpful. And bear in mind, I've created some very broad categories that look a bit segregated, but that's an artificial construction for teaching purposes. Feel free to make them more dynamic in your case. So, as we remember, a collective exists to fulfill desires. Now, in case you're wondering, why not just threaten people to keep them in line? Well, as Socrates put, I've gained this by philosophy. I do without being commanded what others do only through fear of the law. Because the thing is, when you only have coercion, the incentives are to not get caught. And so, and yeah, those systems might be somewhat okay for people where you just want your people to pay their taxes and carry on, but on doing their lower order morality, basic stuff like not killing, not stealing, all that stuff. But if you want them to act in a certain way, they need to feel a part of the thing, a part of the system. So, how do you do that? Well, let's look further. Now, with an organic community, you don't really need to go much further, because you have things like, so when you have that shared space, people through their lived experience will feel part of the shared space, sharing a town, a bus route, a congregation, and the National Health Service. All of these are examples of an organic community that exists because people share that space. Maybe a physical space like an island, or a more social space like a town. But either way. So the question would be, how do you link people who don't share a physical connection to one another and of course split certain people apart from the people they do have a physical connection with? Well, there are ways, be it through educations, through ethics, through folklore, through trends, and through individuals. Or, in the case of those individuals who are not the individual that the collective is built around, allegiance to that individual. So anyway, let's get started. When it comes to ethics, in this sense, I'm going to categorize them more by what the ethical system is based on. And you might be thinking, eternal punishment in the fires of torment, maybe? Some kind of paradise thing? Yeah, that's more a faith issue, because bear in mind, not all ethical systems are a faith-based system. And anyway, because especially the more you get people thinking about their religion, the more you get people thinking, maybe it's not quite like that power hierarchy suggests it is. You have more, people discussing these things. Trust me, we love to argue, at least in our church. But, we're friendly about it. Anyway, that aside, what more commonly happens with these ethical systems of collectivization is that it's about social order and the fear of collapse, which is why sometimes you get, for example, a sort of universalist kind of approach, or pre-modern idea. Now, which might be interesting to note, because the idea is that there's an innate set of values could be from a divine source, but they don't have to be. Just ask Aristotle or Plato. Well, the divinity of Plato's form of the good is a matter of debate, but still, point is that there is a set of values that are commanded because they are good. You know, that end of the Euphrose dilemma. And that societies function best when everyone follows these set of values passed down through the ages. An interesting fact is that a lot of these systems can be quite multi-ethnic, in theory at least, because of the fact that, and in early modern history we often saw them opposed to nationalism because of the fact that they saw these values are meant to be universal, you know, ones that anyone from wherever in the world will follow and find a better life. But you got that, and you might be thinking, so is like the teleological systems like utilitarianism going to be in this going to be another thing as well? Well, in a way, I put that more in this category. Now, for any ethicists thinking, what, utilitarianism treated as a deontological value? Well, in a way, yes. After all, without getting into too much meta-ethics, what is it about the greatest amount of pleasure for the lowest amount of pain that makes it inherently good? You know, why should a society pursue this as opposed to any other goals? Now, there are other ways of constructing ethical systems. One that's perhaps a lot more present-based in theory is the idea of emotivism. You know, it's our society, it's very, you know, how people feel about things. You know, but ultimately morality, well, ethics in this case, is more of a people issue. More sort of like everyone feels this way, this is how we all feel kind of thing. But it's all based in our sort of core emotional gut. And you might be thinking, oh, nice. That's a sort of, you know, consensus-based kind of thing. Although that can get, well, I don't know whether this is the best word, but conservative or particularist can be quite common, you know, because, well, change can be a little bit hard to do if you have to get everyone's feeling, you know, people like things how they are and people can get a bit, so anyway, you can have this sort of feeling like, but, you know, the idea of an ethical system based on, you know, how we all feel really deep down, once you cut away all the complexities. Then, of course, there's another way. Some call it virtue ethics, although I don't really feel this is a useful term here. But the idea of it being about the improvement of an individual, although more specifically than just a universal system, everybody has their own craft. So you are, you know, to be the best builder, the best husband, the best wife, the best cook, the best soldier, the best, you get the idea. But there are other ways, and why don't we move on to those now? Educations. Now, so you might be thinking, what kind of educations are they being done? And again, I got 3 broad categories for you, created for teaching purposes. Well, one, education in utility, what some call the modernist approach. You know, how do we sort out the best social outcomes for the least intense use of resources? Take away a lot of that finery and make everything functional. Learning the art of function. And there are other ways, you know, as opposed to functionality, perhaps just you focusing on you as an individual being the most productive individual you can be for the benefit of your society as a whole. It's another way. Hey, and of course, a sort of perspective-based idea, you know, learning the world through the different varied perspectives and eyes that can exist throughout it. which also kind of clashes with that universalist idea slightly, although it doesn't have to. Bear in mind, a lot of the culture clashes, as it were, are contingent on a certain means of production. But point here is, you might say, well, there are these innately different ways of seeing the world, might cause some to question, so how come there are universal values, and or balance it either way? And then, of course, little what I'm calling folklore, based around a group experience, perhaps, or the individual self-expression. Meaning derived from a sense of self, a sense of existential understanding of being a self in a world of selves. The sort of postmodern, this kind of expression, kind of unity, coming together as free creatives and creating this sort of meaning out of all the different selves patching together. Or a folklore could be more culture-based, taking a specific set of values. And now often in these kind of culture-based ideas of folklore, the sort of wider groups that you get are based on a sort of idea that, yes, some of these values can be learned. In fact, often as the folklore goes, people learn their way into them rather than are born innately into one or the other, although sometimes those lines can get pretty blurry. Anyway, and of course there's another way, the shared struggle that certain groups of people may go through. Even if their individual members may not face these kind of challenges, there can be an understanding that collectively they all share this kind of history of oppression and struggle that other people outside their group don't, or maybe do in a different way, but not in the particular way they do, or have different struggles, but are often, but you get the point. Then, of course, trends, a way of society moving things, and it's a bit more commercial kind of thing, and but it doesn't have to be in that sense. So it could be very gratification based, hyper modern, as some people might call it. Fulfilling an individual demand. You may have wondered about the principle of functionality when we were talking about educations. This stripping that down further. What does it even mean to be functional? Well, it means to satisfy a demand. That's the hypermodern answer, which, can make it rather visceral, guttural, but there are other ways of a trend working as well. I mean, trends in this sense can also refer to a labour movement, for example. Group of workers, people who work in a specific trade, trying to build up their position and their needs, making sure those are met by their society. And yeah, there's some crossover with the common struggle thing as well in this. As I say, a lot of these categories are more separated here than they actually would be in a real organic world, but it's for teaching purposes, it makes it work better. Anyway, then we have a third idea, the idea that it's not about filling any kind of demand or group needs or something like that. It's about making things as they ought to be. For example, white wedding dresses, these ideas around purity and all that stuff. It's a bit, it may not really mean very much to some people, but there's a kind of, bringing things to how they should be in a world that's kind of distorted. But that's kind of life. So trying to But the point is, with these trends, they're more trying to capture an ideal, a snapshot of a human experience, to make it more permanent in the mind, in the life of people. And so then we move on to the individual, who perhaps they have some great vision, a visionary of how the world should be and what we're going to make it in the future if you just follow me and my lead, as it were. Or perhaps they're a great negotiator, the power broker, as it were. Not to be confused with the actual book, The Power Broker, by Robert Caro. I think it was about Robert Moses. Anyway, the point of these people is that they can see the sort of fault lines, the conflict areas between different groups, and reconcile them together. And as I say, this doesn't have to be mutually exclusive with the visionary, but when teaching. Or, of course, maybe it's just a pure charisma build. This individual is power, is the embodiment of power and strength, the unifying factor, the flag bearer of your people, the one who's going to make your people great again. Or some other rhetorical nonsense. Yeah, I know that sounds a bit biased, but still, these are not this isn't properly objective. It's based more on my own thought process with writing. But anyway, more to the point, your person might be wanting to, come up with something, but that's a point. It's very intangible in its meaning, but it sounds so good to make, when you've put in a people's name and make them great again. It sounds brilliant, even though it's got nothing that actually can be held to. But it's an ideal. It brings people. It sounds like it can bring people together. A unifying factor in a world of chaos. That sort of thing. Yeah, that's a kind of rhetoric. And you may want to keep a track of that idea. Is that rhetoric being used? Because a lot of politics is rhetoric. But anyway, just an important thing to remember about the receptiveness of your individuals, your individual characters, because after all, they have their actualization needs and wants and desires. They also have their material needs, wants and desires. And they also have their communal needs, wants and desires. And as I said before, making those kind of connections between people who don't share anything like physical between one another, that can be quite tricky, which is why nation building has been a very tricky process throughout history. But I hope that helps, and it was lovely having you here.